Monkeyboy's YouTube channel is possibly necessarily the best YouTube channel, and therefore necessarily the best YouTube channel.
You know, I've actually been favoring, like you mentioned, natural selection. I've been favoring the EAAN argument recently by Plantinga.
Really?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why?
I think it's a really good intuition pump for a lot of people when you talk to them. I'm not saying like it's the best argument for God or something, but I've really been.
Well, it's not an argument for God. I mean, like if you put it in the context of God, you're gonna have problems because.
Well, yeah, I agree.
Like the thing.
It's an argument against
because like people do
evolutionary naturalism.
Yeah, people will use it as like a self-defeating argument, but like people will do this move where they like extend it to like theism in some way, but then it's really weird because the thing they think is required for reliable cognitive faculties isn't something that's going to be blended to God, right? He's going to fall foul of that because he's not going to be someone that's created by a divine, agent such that guarantees him cognitive faculties, right? So
well, that's where
move, and I don't think they realize what they're doing there.
Well, we can say like this is the way I usually take it. So I think when we're making an argument, like when Plantinga is making his argument against evolutionary naturalism, I think what he's doing is implicitly making an argument for God, not necessarily directly making an argument for God. So saying, okay, when you actually apply this notion of a mind, and again, if you're getting into like metaphysical necessity, then it's not going to be the case that that's going to have to be applicable toward God, because we're instantiating something.
Well, no, the point is though is that in order for you to have those reliable cognitive faculties, right? Like the point is though is that it's not like God is designed with this, like to guarantee that he has reliable belief forming faculties, right? It's not like it's the case that he's lended the same kind of credit that
Yeah, well, I think that's where the symmetry breaker is. So you have like you have the undesigned versus the designed in reference to the cognitive faculties. Like so, you may still have circularity, which Plantinga even agrees with.
It's not about circularity. It's just like a parity of reasoning issue. It's like my point is that you should have never made this move if further down the line, what it means to have reliable cognitive faculties is that they're designed, because when it comes down to God's beliefs or knowledge or whatever, right? Whatever the intentional states we invoke, it's not the case that his are designed, right? So they just fall foul to the thing that lends you reliable cognitive faculties. That's the issue.
Well, I don't think, like it depends on how you frame it. I would agree with you. I think if you frame it a certain way, it could. But if you do this in line with like contingency and saying, okay, this is applicable toward contingent minds, and there's going to be a symmetry breaker there.
I don't understand what the modal status has to do with it. It's not going to be different for when someone runs a fine-tuning argument, and I point out this parity of like this regression of design arguments, that it's like it doesn't seem like a warranted move, right, for them to say, well, the reason why it's just not the case is because God's like a necessary being or something like that.
It's not just yeah.
Same way that like when I point out that like if someone wants to go further with EAAN, what they want to say is that like in order to have reliable cognitive or belief forming faculties or whatever, however you want to phrase it, what's part of that like thesis is that it's designed or something. Well, it's like, okay, but then then I can just kind of point out the issue, like where that runs foul when it comes to God's beliefs. And
so
how do you? I don't know what the modal status is like doing to absolve that issue. It just seems kind of.
How do you respond in reference to the expectation? Just out of curiosity.
What do you mean the expectation? What are you talking about?
Yeah. So like,
you're talking about like EAAN in general.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't think that there's selection for in general, right? Or selection against, but that's a different thing.
Sorry, you're cutting out.
I said I don't think that
you cut out.
Do you hear me now?
Yeah, there was like a.
Well, from what I understand, the argument's phrased using language like selection for.
I think that's your connection.
Yeah, I just deny this idea of selection for or against. I think that's like an intentional context, right? So I have like an issue with that, but that's a separate thing to get into.
Yeah,
right? So like, I think evolution's true.
Right, that's where you were mentioning Fodor, right?
Yeah, exactly. So this
Dude, I don't
argument,
know why, but
this
the light
argument
is skipping,
this
and I'm on
argument doesn't
Wi-Fi.
affect me.
Is
Like
it right?
I don't know that I even have to be a naturalist and accept this notion of selection for when it comes to evolution. It doesn't seem like it's entailed by naturalism that I have this theory in mind, like that this scientific theory is like entailed by my view or something, right? So
Yeah, so I would agree, like the lack of intentionality, but the production, like the cause relation, is still going to be applicable, right? Because you're going to, like, what's more expected that we have truth tracking beliefs on evolutionary naturalism, not necessarily just the selection for, but that we have truth tracking beliefs on evolutionary naturalism due to the fact that evolutionary naturalism just provides for survivability.
But this is the same problem that arises with all these arguments, right? Is that theism doesn't generate any predictions unless you build in further stuff, right? And you're just going to lower the prior probability. Look, I mean, a way to think about it is with all these arguments, fine-tuning, psychophysical harmony, this type of way of framing the EAAN, right? Yeah, if, it things are in a world in which there's a being that wants these things count as evidence for that being. Why is that an interesting thing to say, right? In a world in which there are fairies that steal shoes, right? Then missing shoes are evidence for shoe stealing fairies, right? It's just not interesting to say that this is expected on this hypothesis unless you give us some independent reason to think that that's a good
Wait, can you say
hypothesis.
the ending thing? I don't know why, but my Wi-Fi is.
No, that's no
I don't know why
problem.
my Wi-Fi is like
That's no problem.
tripping out.
I'm saying it's
Can
not.
you say the last part again?
Yeah, I was just saying I don't see why it's really interesting for people to present these hypotheses unless they're giving us something more than they merely accommodate the evidence.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we're predominantly just judging like fundamental hypotheses, right? And so if we're going to judge,
when you say
sorry,
sorry to interrupt you, but like when you say when people who run the fine-tuning argument or the psychophysical harmony, when they run it in a kind of Bayesian form, it seems to me all they're doing is saying, yeah, in a world in which there's a being that wants these things are probability raising if they're observed, but that's just going to be true of all the naturalistic hypotheses in which these things are probability is raising as well, right? That's the whole point of the stalking horse issue, right? Is that there's going to be a set of naturalistic hypotheses that predict these same outcomes, right? And so
and that's I would agree that you would have like similar explanatory power, but that's where I think we can move into like parsimony and simplicity.
Well, I don't even know that it matters. Like, too, though, it's like a natural. It seems like someone that's like a non-naturalist, that's an atheist, could just do the same move, right? So
yeah, that's right. It doesn't have to be naturalism. There's going to be atheistic hypotheses that predict those same outcomes.
Yeah, and I think that's where we can move into like a conversation about simplicity if we're equal in reference to explanatory power.
Well, I mean, yeah, I've heard people say that there's some way to argue that God is a simpler hypothesis, and that's some kind of virtue that the hypothesis has. I'm not sure I really understand what kind of simplicity they're talking about.
So there's a paper, I think I sent it to you, Jmike. There's a paper that I think is really interesting called Occam's laser. So it's playing on words in reference to Occam's razor, but it's saying the hypotheses in which...
Sijuati paper?
No, it's not Sijuati.
Sorry, I don't think of something. Never mind. Sorry.
No. So it's a hypothesis in favor of saying, okay, we have these. We're not judging complexity based off the total sum of parts, but rather we are going to evaluate the complexity versus like these fundamental entities that would produce the like.
We've talked about
the foundation for the hypothesis.
The issue with that though is that like, so like if that's the case, like this is the way I see it. I don't anyone tell me if I'm wrong, but like it seems as though like when I put like if I was like an Oppian, I put like it's not like for free. I write down necessary initial state of the universe and then like make a derivation to this like primitive usage of electrons or like stars or cats, right? It seems like what's going on is that I have some primitive predicate usage about electrons and stars and cats. So I have these like primitive commitments in my theory, and they're not like
just so I'm clear. How are you using primitive here?
Yeah, like I'm not going to be able to like break things down much further. Like I have this usage of a cat that I might not be able to like articulate like particle physics or some other, like maybe I introduce other predicates there or something, but like I'm gonna have like primitive usages of terms that I use, right? And I'm gonna have like these commitments I have aren't derived from. It's not like I write God exists and then I do a logical derivation without adding anything else, and then I get to the existence of electrons, right? I don't think such a derivation exists, and I don't think that exists on my view either. I don't think like I put the initial state of the universe or naturalism or something, and then I just make this derivation of the existence of electrons. This is like a primitive commitment in my theory that I have to explain, and then I want to explain the data, right? It seems like Paul Moser, who's a Christian, he put it, and I think it's like a really simple way. Like I don't know what we're arguing about on this. I think he was arguing against like other Christians that want to make this simplicity move, which is, look, there's the natural world, and then there's the natural world plus God, right? And so in other words, it's just like these primitive commitments you have. It's not like you make this derivation without adding anything else. I don't do that, and so you have extra commitments. Like there's a whole bunch of things I haven't heard about, like predicates in terms that I don't even use, like Trinity, incarnation, gens, genies, like all this stuff that other people may believe in that have no usage in my theory, right? They serve no utility at all. And
well, I think that's kind of what's in question.
Adopt, right?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what's in question is like, okay, should we consider the hypotheses on the grounds of saying the natural world plus God, or do we consider it on like the fundamental qualities of the natural world, like in retrospect with like the fundamental qualities of God to produce like these things or these types of things?
Yeah, but look. There's going to be, I'm going to say that there's like fundamental like dispositional qualities that allow for like the existence of cats and stars and electrons. That's going to be no different than your view. But the point is that like we're looking at like the explanandum, right? Like there's this stuff that we're trying to explain, and it's not clear that on your view you like could write down God exists and then make this derivation without adding anything else to the existence of electrons a priori, right? These are things that you go out in the world, and identify a posteriori, right? And we have very similar primitive commitments. It's not like we're lending any aid on whatever metaphysical theory we have, right? That seems to be just clearly false, right? So the idea is that you don't just posit one thing and then get all this stuff for free. You would do that if it was the case that you could, write down God exists and then make this logical derivation to the existence of electrons without adding anything else. But that's not what's going on your view or my view. And I would never make this view that my view is simpler because like the initial state or naturalism lends me this like the fundamental dispositions for electrons to exist or something. That'd be a weird move for me to make. And I'm trying to say I don't think a theist should make that. It seems naive to me, right? It seems like the wrong way to do this.
Sorry, hopefully y'all can't hear me like sweeping my floor.
Does that make sense? Do you understand what I'm saying? I mean, I might not be doing a good job of explaining myself. When you say it's fundamental and it has these properties for these things, like, I mean, I can say that, I can mirror that.
Well, maybe fundamental is the wrong word.
And then my point is that we're clearly not positing this thing and then getting these other things for free. If that was the case, what I'm expecting is some type of derivation, right? But since that's not the case, there aren't these entailments from God exists to this expectation for electrons, right? Because God could exist and there could be no electrons, right?
Well, this is kind of I guess what I'm not understanding. So let's say we're just looking at all the stuff. Okay, we're a priori we're looking at all the stuff. Now I'm not convinced that it's the case that we arrive at like God belief in the posteriori sense, right? I think there are some good arguments to present that a priori humans have a disposition toward God belief over like naturalistic belief.
If you have an a priori argument, then we don't need to worry. Why are we worried about?
Well, no, I'm not giving it a priori.
You to mine because you could just give me an argument that rationally compels me to accept the conclusion. Right?
Yeah, no. I'm not giving it a priori argument. I'm just referencing like that's just a side point. But
well, I was just saying
the main point is if we're looking at all the stuff. Oh, sorry.
No, you're good. I just think if maybe I'm misunderstanding you, but like if you're saying that you think that those arguments exist and that you think by your lights they're sound, I'd be interested in that as well. Like because then it just might be the case that I'm rationally committed. I feel like the reason why I don't give like some a priori argument for like my view or something, like I don't really buy into the project of arguments like a lot of other people do because there seems to be some like parroticism going on in a lot of the arguments that are constructed. I'd rather
when I say an argument,
look at it in the way that we're talking about it, right?
Yeah, when I say an argument, I wasn't using it in like a philosophical sense with inference or something. The arguments that are I was using argument more in a colloquial sense. So like
Well, you said something about it that there are good a priori arguments for God existence, but maybe I misunderstood you.
Yeah, I might have just misspoke, but
No, that's fine. That's fine.
So it's mainly just talking about psychologically people having a disposition to God belief prior to evaluating evidence. That was the only point, but it wasn't really tangential. So
Oh, you're good. Maybe I might have misunderstood you. I was just saying, well, I'm interested in that if you have that kind of, because me and you don't really, we've talked a lot about this, but I was like, I'm not really interested in, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm interested in what you have because.
Yeah. So if we just ask the question in this way, right? Let's look at all the stuff, and then we say, okay, what's the best explanation for all the stuff? And then we hypothesize on that. We're not actually using the stuff in order to explain the stuff, but we're saying, well, just what's the best explanation for the stuff? And then the simplicity is going to be in favor of, okay, hypothesis A, let's say there's a God. Hypothesis B, let's say, okay, naturalism produces this stuff, right?
Well, hold on. What's the datum? What's the thing that so like by datum, but what I mean is, what's the thing that me and you agree on such that we compare the view? Because like
I would say that we
don't want to do is like, just real quick, one thing we don't want to do is like, if you go, well, what best explains the resurrection of Jesus or something? I'd be like, well, that's not a datum in my view. The datum in my view would be that there are reports of a resurrection. That's something that me and you were going to agree upon.
Sure. So
right?
Something we could agree on is like material reality, like saying, okay, when we're evaluating the stuff, that the stuff does exist in a meaningful way, not in like a conceptual way, like a brain in the vat or hard solipsism or something, but the stuff exists in a meaningful way.
Generally, why stuff exists, I don't know. Like on your view, you're just like, why there's something rather than nothing is going to be because there had to be something, and it's going to be because and what that something is going to be God.
I don't articulate it something rather than nothing, but yeah.
Well, that's seemingly that.
Or
well, sorry,
something is coming out of nothing, like or anything like that. I understand.
No, it sounded like what you were saying. I'm just trying to make sure I'm understanding what the datum is, because like what it sounded like you were saying was the thing that we're both seeking to explain is why there's something rather than nothing, which that's okay. Yeah, like that seems like a point that I agree. Like there's something.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Yeah. So why there's something rather than nothing is a point that we're trying to explain. And then the Occam's laser, all it's doing.
Yeah, but hold on. Sorry, I keep cutting you off, but it's not. We're gonna be going like point by point, right? So like one thing's gonna be like, why is there something rather than nothing? And then like, on my view, there's gonna be like a necessary initial state of the universe, or like an infinite regression of
correct.
Or something. And then on your view.
So that's all that the Occam's laser does. Is it's like, okay, why is there something rather than nothing? Now let's actually hypothesize. And Occam's laser isn't in reference to God plus nature, but rather we judge the two hypotheses on their fundamental and essential qualities that produce the stuff, right? That's all that it basically does. Is it saying, okay, theism wins.
But now let's go to like the initial state of the universe, right? Yeah. On your view, it's contingent, right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, in my view, it's not. It's necessary. So I'm going to fully explain why it's that way rather than any other way that it could be. Or I mean, like, I guess I gotta be careful because there could be things within the initial state that are like accidental features or something.
Well, like I said, what we're really looking at is the essential fundamental features. So, like the initial state, what is going to like bring about, and this isn't going into necessarily like teleological stuff, but that's what you're judging on the two hypotheses in reference to, because we both have the same explanatory power, right? The stuff.
Yeah, but okay, so it's not clear to me though. Like it's like I'm worried that there might be like a brute contingency on your view about why God decides to create this initial state rather than any other initial state or an initial state at all, right? Because like if you accept that creation's a free gift, then it's. I mean, you already accept that it's contingent, but maybe part of that story is that like, well, look, I hold to this theological consideration of like creation's a free gift. God didn't have to give us this gift, but He did, right? And so He could have just refrained from creating anything at all. But lucky us.
Yeah, I think God is the only, like in my view, and I think I've told you this before, but God is the only being that actually has libertarian freedom.
Okay.
I think every other being or type of being is going to be compatibilistic in virtue of God's creative power.
Okay, but then under this notion of like libertarian free will, then what explains why God decides to chooses to create this initial state rather than any other or none at all?
I know.
Maybe better yet. Let me ask you: is there an explanation for why He chooses it, or is there no explanation? Maybe just phrase it that way.
Yeah. So it depends on what you're referencing as an explanation. So this is, I know you've heard this 1,000 times if you've talked to Than for any any meaningful amount of time is like axiological. So when we're saying, okay, God creates this type of world because he values this type of world, and then we talk about those values specifically, not necessarily even theologically, but we just talk about those values. It's like, okay, the expectations of those values. So the reason
values necessary, like part of his necessary nature.
Are the values part of his necessary nature? Yeah, I think that would be. I think.
So then, how is it? Then how is it not true that we don't just get some type of modal collapse? Because like, if his values correspond, it's not like his values are like cross variant in this way, or maybe they are. Maybe you can flesh that out. But it seems
so I mean, if we're looking at like the possible world semantics, and we say, okay, there are reasons for why God would value this world over a logically possible world. Those values, I think they are going to be like consistent with, perfect being theism is going to be one view. Perfect being theism entails perfect rationality. And so the production of those values through God's creative power. And I also like Joshua Rasmussen's view that all of these properties that we're referencing in relation to God is going to kind of tie back into omnipotence, right? Are you familiar with that one? So it's it's basically like,
real quick, I'm not. My only thing is I'm not clear on like. So like, just to track what I'm asking is that I was asking whether or not this was like God could have refrained from creating, and that seems to be the case.
Yeah, I think God could have refrained from creating.
Okay, and then I asked the question, or you brought up that God has this libertarian free will, and I said, okay, well, is there an explanation for like why he chooses?
Yeah. So
rather than not, and then it seemed like you said, yeah, there is this explanation, and it's like his values.
One thing I forgot to mention. So yes, there's the values, but also I would make an argument for like dispositional qualities that are necessary to be expressed. So
yes. Then how I don't understand how how there's any contingent facts at all, right? Like it just seems like he's going to have these values and this dispositional qualities, as you put it, right? But they're going to correspond. Like you have a full explanation of why this world is created rather than not. And so when we look at God, we want to ask like, what would explain why we could get a different world at all? It doesn't seem like that's available to you because it's not like his values have some type of cross-world variance such that allow for this contrastive difference, right, to explain why there's one outcome rather than the other. Do you understand what I'm saying?
So let me repeat it back to you, right? So you're saying when we're looking at God's desires or we're looking at God's values, when you say there's no cross-world variance, can you actually just nail that down for me? When you say there's no cross-world variance, give me like an analogy.
Yeah. So like think of like a Thomist, right? So like they think that God's octus purus, right? Like he has no accidental features. So across all worlds, God's divinely simple and right. There's nothing about God that changes, right? And then now we just think about different possible worlds that God could create. So God could create like world 1 and world 2. So me and you stand at world 1 that God creates, and we look back at God. Pause. Go to world 2. We're at world 2. It's a different world, and we look back at God. Well, what's different about God in either of those worlds? Nothing, right? There's no difference. God's the same in either of them. So what contrastively explains why we get one world rather than another? If God's the same in across all worlds, you would expect to get the same.
Okay. I think I know. So something that you could say that would still be an attribute of God would be like an extrinsic property, so a relational property. So there's nothing intrinsic in God that would be different in reference to immutability, but you may have difference in reference to like an extrinsic relation. So let's say you have world A to where Jmike exists, world B to where Jmike does not exist. In world A, a distinction between A and B is going to be an extrinsic property that God possesses that he would not possess in world B, considering you don't exist.
I'm not sure I understand, because what I'm trying to understand is whether or not.
Well, you're correct me. Like you're asking what would be different. So like let's take God out of it for a second. And let's say, okay, just Jmike.
Well, maybe I'd be clear. What I'm saying is it doesn't seem like you could give the contrastive explanations, right? Because God's values will always correspond to the world that he creates, right? It's not like...
but if we're looking at like logically... So I think there's a
I mean,
distinction.
unless you want to say his like those values are also contingent, right? But it sounded like what you wanted to say was that they're necessary.
So,
right? So you want to bake in like across worlds, God has different values. Right?
well,
Something
I would
that's
say
almost
it this
wouldn't
way.
be. There's something internal or accidental, like these accidental features about God.
So I would
That
say it
would be
this
fine.
way.
It'd be like
They're
me
maybe
doing the
not
same
logically
thing with the
necessary.
initial state. I'd be like, well, the initial state's necessary, but things within the initial state are like contingent, right?
Yeah, so I would probably make this distinction, and then like we can go back to the extrinsic attributes. The distinction I would make would be something like, okay, God's values are not like logically necessary, right? They could be contingent in a logical sense, as which there's no contradiction in God having a separate set of values logically, but they might not be the case metaphysically, in the sense of like we're looking at these possible worlds in how God desires to design them. And so they could be necessary in that sense. So contingent logically, but metaphysically necessary in virtue of like how he creates.
Like God is a contingent. Like I understand that. Like the problem that I'm finding is that we're trying to figure out what explains why God creates this world or this initial state rather than any other initial state or no initial state. And the answer is going to be right. Well, like what like God, like why what I asked more specifically was, is there an explanation? Because like this is the thing I was weirded out at first, was that like if someone wants to say there's libertarian free will involved, what they usually might say is like, well, there is no actual explanation because it's this like species of like indeterminacy. So like libertarian free will is like there's like brute contingency going on. It's like this like genus of indeterminacy or something like that. But you wanted to say, well, it's fully explained by his values that he has, right? But my worry though is that if that's explained by his values, then it's not like those values give way to a different world or something, right? You're just going to get this one world that God's values correspond to, right? That's the point I'm trying to make. So I'm trying to understand what you're saying. That
and you're extrapolating from that because the values would exist only in one way, that because the values would only exist in one way, that that world is necessary, not contingent, right?
Yeah, it seems like you would have to make this move that the values are brutally contingent, or they're contingent. But then I'm gonna point out again that, well, okay, so the first thing that was weirding me out was the brute contingent choice, but now it turns out that the values are brutally contingent. Right?
So let me put it in this way, see if this helps. I have no issue saying that God can have like a type of first order or second order desires, or first order or second order values. So let's use an example you use quite often, right? In creating a world, like Mackey's argument, where agents always choose the good. That could be a world that God values, right? He values the fact that there is no like people doing evil. There's no schmurder. There's none of that. God can value that, but obviously because we're asking about this world, it's the case, okay, that God values this world over that world because, so like one example could be God desires to express.
Are you just saying that the values are brutally contingent?
Say again.
Are you just saying that the values are contingent?
I don't know if I want
to be. If they could be otherwise, then it seems like you're saying that they could fail to be one way rather than another. And then I'm going to make the same move and press why they're that way. This is what I'm pointing out, is it seems like you'll just have this brute contingency on your view. So it's like either you just start out with these like accidental features of God, whatever you want to place them at, the value or whatever, the nature or whatever it is. It seems like you're not buying any advantage than if I had said that the initial state was brutally contingent. Like, right, I could have made that move, in my view seems to be more parsimonious, right?
Okay, I think I understand what you're saying. Let me think about that before I respond.
Yeah, no problem.
I understand. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, because it just doesn't seem like it's buying me an advantage to like inflate my economy or the ontological economy in that way, right? Because I'm just gonna introduce this like a new foreign entity, right? Presumably more complex. I don't know. I mean, you don't hold the divine simplicity, but like presumably more complex than the things I seek to explain.
Well, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't. My view is it just seems like I go into the metaphysics shop with people and they pay a lot of fucking money and I get the same groceries as them for a lot less. Right. It seems like I'm cutting a great deal, and so I'm not gonna pay the same amount as you. Like, why would I do that?
Oh, yeah. Let me think about it, and I'll get back to you. Because I don't think I'm articulating it well right now. I'd like to actually go through the paper with you at some point.
Yeah, I'm not trying to even. Yeah, I'm not speaking towards this because I don't know that paper. I'm just trying to point out that if we just if we single out this data, it's I don't know that you're getting stuff for free, right? That seems weird to me. We're looking at the picture of causal reality, and I have it starting in a spot that you already think it's already something that you agree exists. You think that there's a beginning of the universe. I don't have to convince you of that, right?
Yeah.
Right. And then when someone wants to say that it's something they get for free, it's well, there's several reasons. The one thing I mentioned earlier about predicate usage that I don't have to adopt in my theory and stuff like that. But I think more importantly, when we actually do the little test, what turns out is that I don't know where the
maybe I just
I don't know where this free stuff is coming from when it turns out that seems like my view is still buying the advantages, right?
Maybe I just need to adopt Swinburne's view of contingency and necessity.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know that Swinburne's view is doesn't run foul of the same issues, but
no, I was making a joke. It wasn't.
That is to say.
Yeah, I wasn't being serious. I like Swinburne on a lot of stuff, but he goes in some weird directions on that. Sorry, I think we might have lost you, your audience, Monkey Boy.
No, we still got 70 people.
There were more when I got in here.
Do you understand though, why it's important? Then, if you bring up the libertarian thing, though, asking that question is important because if you just tell me well, no, there's no explanation for why God chooses that initial state rather than any other, boom, then I got this brute contingent fact. It could have been any other way. Or there's no explanation for it. I can just mirror that on my view that the initial state is brutally contingent, or I just buy the advantage that I do with it being necessary and it being fully explained, right? But in either case, that view on that data alone. But then if you say it is fully explained by his values or something, then I'm sitting there when we follow this trail back, it's really confusing on how you're not either going to just say that thing is brutally contingent, or we don't get some modal collapse issue. Right?
Yeah, let me
whichever way we go, I don't see how theism is buying us advantages on just this data point at least.
Yeah, let me think on that, and I'll get back to you when we talk eventually.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I'm fucking so tired, but I really want to go to the. I think I'm gonna hit up Amdir and see if he wants to go to the bar.
Oh yeah, I heard you were gonna go talk about conspiracy.
Apparently, I'm going to the movies. Just found out last minute.
I got some stuff I gotta finish up, but
What are you gonna go watch?
Oh, you said you're watching a movie?
The new Fantastic Four.
I heard it was a 7 or 8 out of 10. So,
Well,
probably much better than most of the Fantastic Fours that have released.
yeah, well, it has to be. Here, I'm gonna invite this Ace guy who keeps chatting in the comments.
Yeah, is functioning as a mathematical nerd.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave on that note. I got a sweep.
All right, peace.
Peace. Later, Jmike.
See you, brother. Much love, man.
Later, Jack. Much love.
That was a good conversation. I mean, I don't see how you can't just do that for. I mean, this is one of the motivations against theism. It just seems like theism is whole. It's just wholly dispensable explanatorily. It doesn't really seem like there's anything on offer for theism that can't just be done by a non-theistic explanation for which there's some type of theoretical commodity that buys you that explanation over theism. But
yeah, I hope I did a decent job because philosophy has been
no, you did really well.
Oh, thanks. Because philosophy is the last thing I've been doing recently, so I feel like an idiot. Especially when I hang out with Amdir in real life. I'm like, God.